I just want to begin with a sentence, and I want just to say the culture is shared. Better. The more culture is shared, the more it grows, and so the culture has no political color. Let me say that. And I would like to start with a question. Where does the immense cultural heritage for which Italy is an excellent holder came from? It came from our past and tell us about the history of humanity. It tells us that in every age there has been patrons who has contributed to generating the cultural heritage that we have inherited. Lorenzo the Magnificent knew it well and made Florence the center of the Renaissance, above all the Renaissance of his family, because thanks to him, the Medici also went down in history for the quantity of works of art created at that time. Created to demonstrate the greatness of the Medici beyond the borders of their territory. The greatest conflict of that time was about to break out between Ludovico il Moro in Milan, Duke of Milan, and Lorenzo the Magnificent. It was sedated, because Lorenzo the Magnificent sent not a work of art, but an artist, a genius, an inventor without equal, Leonardo da Vinci. So that he could make Milan what he made in Florence: dams, bridges, castles, walls, but also plans for war machines such as the tank that we know because his projects remain on paper and are still conserved. So art, creativity, used as an element of diplomacy to ensure balance between people, but also artworks for reaching peace and connecting people. And this is the first point that will be discussed in this panel. Cultural diplomacy is a concept that has gained more and more relevance in the era of globalization. Cultural diplomacy aims to promote dialogues, mutual understanding, and cooperation between different cultures and nations. Through cultural exchange, art exhibition, festival, educational programs, and other initiatives, cultural diplomacy aims to build a bridge between people, overcoming language barriers and prejudice to foster better communication and peaceful coexistence. Culture has the power to break down boundaries and connect people in a unique way. But if the works of art, the palaces, the villas, the frescoes, and whatever you want, and whatever you want to call culture, has come down to us, it means that those who came later, in addition to promoting a cultural heritage to be handed down, have protected and preserved the inherited one. Knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge leads to care and respect. And let in this moment tell you about two small stories in the history. For the first time in the history, Pope Julius II, we are at the beginning of the 16th century, gave to an artist, Raphael, the divine Raphael, the position of superintendent the monuments of Rome. We are exactly at the beginning of the 16th century. Raphael began to draw up a map of ancient Rome and its monuments. The project never went through due to the premature death at the age of 37 of the great artist from Urbino. But one of his letters remains written together with his friend Baldassare Castiglione, a humanist from Mantua, which tell us of his profound ardor in the defense of an ancient monuments and his indignation for those who were responsible for their destruction and did not prevent them from being damaged even in the modern era. Raphael had intuited the uniqueness of the work of art, especially of it is ancient, testimony to human genius and collective identity, common feeling already at that time, in that time. History tells us another small story that say, while Michelangelo was working on the fresco on the vault of the Sistine Chapel, a wonderful ancient Roman time sculpture was found, which we can see today when we're visiting the Vatican Museum. I'm talking about Belvedere Torso. Pope Julius II, seeing the sculpture without legs, arms, and head, and asked Michelangelo to complete them, but he didn't, because the torso was too beautiful to be altered. Michelangelo understood the power of the sculpture, although incomplete, but reworked it in his mind. In fact, the structure of the torso inspired numerous figures on the vault of the Sistine Chapel. And we are here coming to the second point of this panel, the ancient works of art that inspired the creation of contemporary art. And I also include fashion in these, and for this reason, they must be preserved, conserved, studied, and communicated with the most contemporary language. The power of work of art, which are the mirror of the importance of whoever owns them, has meant that over time the possession of work of art has been highly coveted. There was a time when this was the prerogative of noble families, who could afford to commission an artist to decorate an entire family chapel, such as a portrait or, in any case, masterpieces that was missing from their collection. Caravaggio comes to my mind, acclaimed when he was alive, then forgotten for over 300 years and discovered right between the two world wars. And here we come to touch another point of the panel, during which we will talk more than once about the concept of works of art as war trophies in violation of international law, and about the fact the outcoming masterpieces is often a status symbol that has generated traffic in illegal antiquities. Every heritage must therefore be protected and safeguarded. The conservation of cultural heritage is even more necessary during conflicts to preserve not only works of art, but above all, the identity of a population. This is done by the Peacekeepers for Culture, or Blue Helmet for Culture, a national task force working with the framework of UNESCO's Unit for Heritage campaign, who are engaged in conflict zones to prevent cultural genocide. I jump because it's really I wrote too much. But nothing could be done if there weren't a system of laws, including international one, to regulate the different layers of the world of cultural heritage. We are all responsible. Now, for make this panel the most amazing one of today, first of all, I just say to my panelists, first of all, have fun and be good talking about important things, but in a simple way. So let's start. We have many points to talk about and many stories to tell. And I want to give the word to Fabio Finotti. You speak first. Fabio Finotti is director of Italian Institute of Culture. Fabio will focus on the function of art in cultural diplomacy. So thank you, Fabio. It's you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I will focus on the function of art in cultural diplomacy, and I will articulate my contribution in 6 points, in order to be simple. First, against the popular idea of universal art, we should acknowledge the profound differences in artistic languages among peoples and eras. Cultural diplomacy does not mean to believe that art is something universal. The differences, in fact, produce a continuous confrontation and dialogue between diverse cultures and civilizations. Art and literature are fundamental for putting us in contact with the other, who is outside but also within us. Second, cultural diplomacy can help a nation better understand the foreign nations it is engaged with and foster mutual understanding. Cultural diplomacy is a way of conducting international relations without expecting anything in return, in the way that traditional diplomacy typically expects. Third, in 2022, the Italian Foreign Office has set up a new Directorate General for Public and Cultural Diplomacy, which was created with the aim of making Italian soft power an increasingly effective tool for influencing and building a global consensus on issues that our country considers a priority. With its pillars, communication, strategic planning, Italian presence in international organizations, the new general management is consolidating a constant dialogue with the world of media, research centers, universities, and Italians in international organizations. Fourth, the idea of cultural diplomacy is deeply rooted in Italian history and identity. Already in the Renaissance, the Italian states made politics with the arts as well as with the sword. And for example, they sent the famous Italian horses to the King of England as today one would send a Ferrari. The diffusion of Italian language does not arise from a colonial process, but from a cultural process, just as the richness of Italian culture arises from the ability to welcome other cultures, other peoples, other civilizations within our country. Fifth, I know that the United Nations are moving on this path with the establishment of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. With its motto, Many Cultures, One Humanity, the United Nations Alliance of Civilization embraces and promotes cultural diversity, religious pluralism, and mutual respect. At the center of this commitment, there must be education, on which the law and the institutions will then be grafted. Education systems today face the challenge of preparing young people for an interdependent world that is unsettling to individual and collective identities. Education about one's own history fosters a sense of community and solidarity, but it must be balanced by knowledge of global issues and understanding and appreciation of other societies and cultures. So through its education programs, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations enable citizens to acquire intercultural competencies and critical thinking skills to help foster cross-cultural dialogue and overcome cultural stereotypes and intolerance. Sixth, in addition to the necessary cooperation between the cultural and economic spheres, it is also necessary to give an ethical dimension to the actions of cultural diplomacy, following a path already traced by UNESCO. UNESCO was born to contribute to the maintenance of peace by strengthening collaboration between nations precisely through culture and knowledge in 1946, just after the Second World War. And UNESCO is working to make principles such as those contained in the first major cultural convention, approved in 1970, increasingly universal. For instance, the principle that prohibits the illicit trafficking of cultural goods. But while we block illicit trafficking, we instead must help cultures to meet inside and outside our countries, also inside our countries, where ethnic groups are increasingly diverse and numerous. And in this way, we help to move towards a law that also takes into account an intercultural and global dimension, not only in the relations between territories, between nations, but within the single country. Our homeland is now in itself a small, big world, and we must exert cultural diplomacy also within its boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. So I just focused your speech, and I want to give the word to Antonella Di Campo. Just say to her that cultural diplomacy, as Fabio said, with the cultural diplomacy, you are able to appreciate differences between each other and learn, so in this way, to respect each other. And fashion, that you are talking about, fashion, is a sort of keys to enter inside the differences that came from the traditions. And so Antonella is founder and CEO of the Fashion Law Institute Spain, director of FLIS, is right the name? FLIS. Magazine, FLIS magazine, okay. And he's going to talk about how some fashion brands, instead of encouraging cultural appropriation, have seen as an opportunity to empower entire population of artisans. But I want that Antonella speak to us about this, so it's up to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everyone. I try to say my speech in English, but I wanna say it with my passion about this topic. For that reason, I speak in Spanish. Sorry for that. Okay.
Speak slowly, so we are
okay.
able to understand.
Okay. My name is Antonella Di Campo. I think fashion. Oh, sorry, Spanish. Okay. Cuando hablamos de apropiación cultural en la moda, debemos tomar en cuenta que se refiere al hecho de tomar prestado o simplemente tomar algunos elementos relacionados con la cultura, con el conocimiento de alguna población o algo relacionado a lo que a través de los años han desarrollado una determinada etnia. El problema de la apropiación cultural está específicamente enfocado al hecho de que muchas veces no se hacen las atribuciones correspondientes. No se señala a quién pertenece una determinada, algún elemento que se haya tomado como inspiración para las creaciones de moda. Por lo general, se dice, desde el punto de vista teórico, que se hace, esta apropiación se realiza por parte de alguna cultura o de alguna persona que se considera de alguna manera dominante sobre quien se realiza esa extracción o apropiación. Además, en el caso de la moda, hay que reconocer que muchos diseñadores toman esas referencias artísticas milenarias para desarrollar sus creaciones. Sin embargo, esto no es nuevo. Esto, si bien es cierto, de manera mediática, lo hemos escuchado hace unos cuantos años atrás, el hecho es que cuando tratamos de hacer referencia a la apropiación cultural en la moda, viene aproximadamente desde 1907. Específicamente cuando la UNESCO empezó a definir lo que era el patrimonio cultural. Es decir, que apropiación cultural en la moda está relacionada a esa definición que en su momento UNESCO vio necesario determinar qué era la apropiación. Esto se incentivó específicamente después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial con la intención de proteger a los monumentos culturales que, por supuesto, se veían afectados por el conflicto armado. Posteriormente pudiéramos definir un concepto un poco más amplio de lo que es apropiación cultural desde lo que ha sido la Convención para la Protección del Patrimonio Mundial, Cultural y Natural de 1972. Entonces, hablamos de que esta apropiación cultural tiene que ver con esas expresiones que se han heredado a lo largo de la historia y que, por supuesto, se espera que pasen de generación tras generación. En principio, pudiéramos determinar que existen dos tipos de apropiación cultural. Una material, que tiene que ver con lo que pertenece a objetos materiales de una determinada cultura, y aquellas inmateriales, que son expresiones prácticas y conocimientos de dicha cultura. En el caso de la moda, efectivamente, hablamos de esa apropiación cuando se toman esos elementos inmateriales, ¿okay? Como expresiones, diseños o dibujos de alguna determinada cultura. En la actualidad, la digitalización, que si bien es cierto, ha impactado todos los mercados, en el caso de dar a conocer esa cultura milenaria puede ser favorable, pero en otros casos ha desfavorecido. Cuando de manera deliberada se transmiten a través de redes sociales o a través de cualquier otro medio todo lo que tiene que ver con esa información cultural de una determinada población, y en un momento dado no se explica el significado. El problema esencial de la apropiación cultural tiene que ver con el hecho de que incluso cuando un creador de moda, un diseñador, se apropia de algún elemento cultural, muchas veces no conoce en esencia el significado de esta expresión cultural. Y lamentablemente se puede banalizar esa expresión y no se transmite el correspondiente ejercicio o respeto de esa expresión. Evidentemente, esto genera que quienes sean protagonistas, quienes sean titulares de esos derechos, pueden sentirse un poco ofendidos hacia su práctica, hacia su creencia. Nosotros como consumidores de moda, y yo particularmente desde mi humilde posición como intermedia entre lo que es la moda y el derecho, estos dos mundos que se están combinando, creo que tenemos una tarea importante de tanto dar a conocer a los diseñadores la importancia de reflejar o comunicar correctamente una determinada expresión cultural. Y si la van a transmitir en sus diseños, que hagan las respectivas atribuciones a quien corresponde. No banalizar o incluso no mercantilizar esas expresiones culturales de manera deliberada. Tenemos algunos casos, pudiéramos hablar de muchísimos casos de apropiación cultural, entre ellos caso de Carolina Herrera, Isabel Marán, y entre otros se hablan de casos como Dior, pero lo importante en este asunto es que cada vez más se está abogando por crear instrumentos legales que permitan de una forma controlar ese flujo de apropiación, ese flujo de información a través de la era digital, donde no se da a conocer a ciencia cierta que representa una determinada expresión cultural tradicional. Finalmente, me gustaría mostrarles la parte positiva de esto. Poderosamente me llamó la atención que en Colombia es conocida, como otros países de Latinoamérica, pero particularmente Colombia, tiene un importante arsenal, por así decirlo, de trabajo artesanal y cultural. No en balde, hay muchas marcas o marketplaces que cada vez más exponen trabajos de artesanos colombianos. Hay un diseñador que en lo personal a través de las redes sociales he podido compartir con él, y es admirable lo que él viene haciendo. Quiero comentarles el caso de Juan Pablo Socarrás. Él es un diseñador de moda, tiene aproximadamente 17 años desarrollando un proyecto que se llama Historias Hechas a Mano. ¿En qué consiste este proyecto? Sencillamente, él ha tomado a diferentes comunidades artesanales indígenas, afrodescendientes, que han sido desplazadas o que son víctimas o que se encuentran en contextos difíciles, en Colombia, en México y Guatemala. ¿Qué ha logrado con este proyecto? Bueno, esencialmente dice que no solamente desarrollar trabajo artesanal que de forma económica pueda repercutir en estas poblaciones desfavorecidas, sino que impacta de una forma diferente en estas personas. Estamos hablando de poblaciones de artesanas, esencialmente mujeres, indígenas y afrodescendientes. En todo caso, lo más importante es que ha logrado obtener un feedback de empresas que cada vez más soportan o apoyan este tipo de acciones. Además, hace que esas poblaciones, dentro de lo que son sus actividades culturales milenarias, sean conocidas, pero sin explotación laboral, sin dejar a un lado la importante formación o educación que ellos deben tener. Entonces, en general, mi punto es que no solamente debemos hablar de la apropiación cultural como un hecho negativo, sino revertir y poner en práctica buenos planes o proyectos que permitan apoyar a una serie de poblaciones desprotegidas y que efectivamente pueden o tienen mucho que mostrar al mundo. Este es el momento. La tendencia es ir hacia una moda más sostenible, más consciente. Creo que cada uno de nosotros, como consumidores, como abogados, fashion lawyers o no, debemos dar una mirada positiva a cómo podemos intervenir de manera activa en consumir este tipo de productos, dar a conocerlos o definitivamente apoyar, pero con acciones reales, una moda realmente más sostenible, más ética y más significativa desde el punto de vista social. Bueno, eso es por... Espero que hayan podido entender algo de lo que dije.
So you give me actually a hand to give the word to Harald Czermak. Here he is. Because you are talking about touchable and untouchable heritage, cultural appropriation, and traditions. And Harald would like to talk to us about the connection of art to various fundamental rights. So, Harald, it's up to you.
Thank you, Giulia, for the introduction. Thank you for your words. I will try to bring a lawyer's perspective in what you said and try to connect some of your words. First, how I want to see art for this is not the art as an object, not the art as possession, but the process of creating art, also presenting art, and perception, consummation of art. So the actual contemporary way how art exists and gets to existence. And art also in a very wide sense, not only artworks, not only the pieces, but also performing arts, as you said, literature, which is not art, but literature in this way, street art, fashion, whatever comes here, a way to transport statements, to be creative, and to express something. And there is a big connection between what we heard now, and I will try to find it. Art is the creation on one side and the enjoyment of the other side. So one person creates something and the other has to perceive it. So it's a way to bring people together, and art is also a way, very efficient, to transport the message. The message can be transported by a graffiti on the street, can be transported by the way someone dresses, how something is designed, how a piece is, music is played, whatever. This can be art, and it is the occasion to bring people together. A concert, an exhibition brings people together and shows different perspectives. Art is also not only mainstream, art is also a way to express for minorities, for outsiders, to come together and to get an audience. But of course, this way to express, to get an audience, is also the way to reach the opponent, to reach a regime, to reach someone who doesn't want that this message is spread out. And if we see social media today, it's good to spread the message, it's good to reach people, but on the other hand, it's an instrument to control the messages and to suppress the messages. So what happens is that, of course, the message is not only seen by someone, but someone can be active and to stop spreading these messages. Some governments, they safeguard, they guarantee the fundamental rights of the people, and there are other governments, regimes, however we call them, who take away the rights, who suppress the rights. So I was thinking a little bit, a legal point, what are the main fundamental rights, personal rights, which are connected to art and which are in danger to be suppressed. The first one which comes to mind is, of course, free speech, a personal opinion, because the artist expresses his opinion not only in words, but in his art. And this reaches people, and this can be an offensive act to the regime. The other point is the right of assembly. People come together to enjoy art, to receive the message. This can be forbidden. And finally, of course, the right for private life, the right for living my culture, to make my decisions how I want to design my life. And it's also, of course, we think about minorities, which is an area to be suppressed by a regime. On the other hand, you said we need to see the positive way. Art is always a way where a message can be transported and not very obvious. It is not so obvious and not so difficult to have a graffiti on the street than to write a political manifesto. A demonstration on the street is much more obvious than a theater play, which has the same intention. So art is a way to express, to confront, and to make critics, and in some positions perhaps a very safer way than a direct confrontation. And I wanted to close some, or to come some examples. I thank you talking about UNAOC. It was on my list too, for examples, which is an alliance of civilizations. The aim to combine art and diplomacy, bring people together. And this connects to Antonella too, because I was involved there organizing a fashion show between different cultures, between different areas of people. It was Arabic-European communication, and it brings people together. It makes them understand the others and work together. And this is a way where art, where culture brings people on one place. And something like this, we talk about art, which is like music, children choirs. When you pick children from different backgrounds, you put them together, you make them perform together, and the motto is, if they perform now together, if they're creative together, when they get older, they will not kill each other. And this is some way where art can work. We talk about paintings, where is Spansky, which comes to my mind first, before they started to work with auction houses and they get marketing, but it is a way to transport here also some meanings. And finally, when we talk about Italy, Biennale di Venezia, for me, is also a way, because it's like Art Basel is not a way to only sell art, it's a way to communicate. It is a way to bring people together, to have lectures, to have discussions. And like here, people meet, people talk, and this is a way to understand each other. And the piece is not only that people stop using weapons, it's to understand each other, to make the step. And closing back to you, it's also to understand that there is not a general art. There is not a general taste. And there is not a state art, a governmental art, but it's different. It's a different culture, it's a different art. And that's the way where this may work, bringing people together. And like we say, the art which should be more diverse and more different. I was reading Jose Marti on my flight here. I don't know if someone knows him. And he says, I may say it in my word, the colonism will not end if the people who were depressed first copy their former masters. And the same with art. The art will not be various, will not be different if everyone copies the other. And this is to accept different art and different ways of people acting. And this is the way where fashion, where art, where all comes together. And this is a way to promote peace.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harald. And so you talk about performing art, street art, concert exhibition that create art and receive art, message that can be transferred. Art is a way to express, but also to control the message. And now it's up to Nicola Tegoni answer in a sort of a way, because Nicola Tegoni, equity partner and co-chair of the Italian practice group at the Dunnington, Bartholow and Miller LLP. Nicola will talk about the message of peace in the Arapacis and in the Guernica, so two specific cases. So we go in deep. So we try to put this general discussion inside two topics. Okay, thank you, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Silvia, good afternoon, everybody. In the long history of humanity, the world has always had to deal with wars and its inevitable consequences, such as injustice, destruction, and death. Despite everything, human beings have always managed to rise again, fighting to assert and establish peace, because humans cannot live without peace. The concept of peace is closely connected to that of war. As the famous Italian philosopher Norberto Bobbio says, this is a typical example of an antithesis. Peace is not only the opposite of war or the absence of war. It involves the ability, the will of human beings to live in harmony with themselves, with others, and with nature. Since the dawn of humanity, artists have been great creators and active actors in using their art to express all the feelings that human beings feel in the face of every human event, and have directly confronted the theme of peace. And so art crosses wars, condemns them, goes in search of justice, exalts the value of freedom and the need to produce messages of peace, happiness, and universal harmony. In the preamble to the UNESCO Constitution of November 4, 1946, the governments of the adhering states, on behalf of their peoples, declare that wars are born in the soul of man, and it is the soul of man that must be educated to defend peace. The preamble to the UNESCO Constitution therefore expresses the need to educate the soul in order to achieve peace. Subsequently, the goal of UNESCO was the preservation of cultural heritage during armed conflicts, with the recognition, for example, of the World Heritage Sites. These are masterpieces of exceptional universal value, protected, safeguarded, to be passed on to future generations. Many and notable are the artistic masterpieces produced in every period of history, which either through a denunciation or to admonish or to give voice to a hope for peace, or just to safeguard the universal value of peace. As an Italian, I cannot forget that our past is linked to ancient Rome. I would like to propose as an excellent example of a piece symbolizing masterpiece, the Ara Pacis Auguste, Augustus Peace Altar. It's an ancient altar built in Rome in 9 BC by the first Roman Emperor Augustus, which is dedicated to peace. It is a significant monument that celebrates the peace and prosperity achieved by the work of Emperor Augusto, called Pax Romana. Augustus had returned from Spain and Gaul, having successfully settled the situation in his provinces. Then he came to think about peace, to live in peace. There is not a building in the Roman Empire where Augustus's name and face are not engraved. He understood that through images he can pass this great message of peace to people rather than with weapons. By building this monument to peace, the Ara Pacis, the Roman Curia participates in the propaganda program, understanding and interpreting the role of peacemaker of Augustus, who became emperor. The Pax Auguste is the Pax Romana, a long period of peace rediscovered after centuries of war given by the emperor within the empire. There are numerous representations of the Pax during the imperial period. Everywhere peace is celebrated, insistently celebrated, above all through sculptures to honor Augustus, and so war is kept away. I would like to add a simple but significant example, the olive branch, the symbol par excellence of peace and victory from antiquity. It appears very often on the reverse of the Augustan coins, coins which were circulating in the empire. They were a quick and immediate simple means of divulging the message of peace. Over the centuries, we have seen repeatedly how human beings abused certain situations by generating and degenerating into violent and ferocious wars. A symbolic painting of the brutality of war is Picasso's masterpiece Guernica. This represents the first aerial bombardment in the history of humanity, which was on April 26, 1927, On the canvas, it's an explosion of fragments, shreds of tortured bodies, which symbolizes horror and death. The dark colors bear witness to the horror of war and death. There is no light, there is no hope. The scene is full of tension. Everything is due to the destructive force of the bombardment. New weapons of mass destruction have made their way into the world and into this dramatic canvas as well. The painting is not only the account of a bloody and dramatic battle, but has become the universal image of the victims and opponents of all wars. Guernica is a universal symbol of opposition, of refusal to war. It becomes a great message of struggle for peace, dignity, and freedom of men and women in the whole world. The message of peace in Arapacis and Guernica, it's really two antithetical masterpieces in the composition, which, thanks to the same reflection, lead humans to achieve the highest value of humanity, which is peace. Because from peace springs freedom, respect for other men, respect for the laws, the correct behavior in every sector, charity, and tolerance. In conclusion, a world where harmony reigns supreme and where there is collective prosperity. Thank you.
So, thank you, Nicola. So you speak about peace and war, two faces of the same coins, but also that artists use art for communicate, and also patrons use art to communicate. So I give the word to Ray Dowd, partner at the Dunnington, Bartholow and Miller. And Ray is going to speak about the Hague Convention of 1899 and 1907, created an international legal regime that took the profit motive out of war in the 20th century. So it's up to you to tell us this story.
Thank you, Giulia. President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 put together an executive order for the Union troops. And it was embodied in what became the Lieber Code. And it said, when you're in a war, you can't take the cultural property of the enemy. And he did that in the context of a war that would rip the United States apart. There was a Confederacy, there was a battle between families, brothers and sisters on either side, and tearing each other apart, potentially. And he wanted to put in rules for the troops and the soldiers that would avoid causing too much damage that would utterly tear the country apart separately. That Lieber Code of 1863 was adopted by civilized nations in 1899 and 1907 in the Hague Conventions again, on the laws of warfare and the laws against war crimes. And those Hague Conventions were the basis of the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II. And basically the upshot there is now there is a legal regime in place that takes away the profit motive of war. And that is the international law that, among at least signatory nations, has dominated the 20th century. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the controversies still in our legal system in the United States, and contrast it a little bit with the system in Europe, and talk about really just sort of one case that I think embodies these different and warring principles that are still being resolved today. So there's a case called Cassirer versus the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection. And the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection is a museum located in Spain. Spain bought the collection, but in that collection, there were works of Nazi-looted art. And this is not disputed. Today, Spain says, yeah, we know it now, today, we know it was stolen. But when we bought it, we didn't know it was stolen. And the question is, well, should Spain give it back to the Jewish family from which it was stolen? So Spain says no. Under Spanish law, we have the law of acquisitive prescription. If you buy it, you don't know it's stolen, you take it, you can keep it. And this is a hangover of the Napoleonic Code. It was a Spanish law that was passed, I believe, 1868. So we have this law that says we can keep stolen property under the theories of the Napoleonic era. Is that query consistent with the Lieber Code, the Hague Convention, the laws against stealing property from your enemy? Does it truly take out the profit motive if you can just grab it, say you don't know where it came from, and keep it? So these are the questions that are being litigated today. So in June of 2023, last month, the parties all put the question to the California Supreme Court, because California law says if there's a thief in the chain of title, no one can take good title. And the conflict is with Spanish law. It says, well, if you get it and you don't know, you can keep it even if it's from a thief. So this conflict now is playing out in our courts. What is at issue is, are we going to truly take the profit motive out of war? Even though these conventions were passed in 1899 and 1907, we obviously haven't received the full legal promise of what was agreed to. This is today being litigated in our courts in the United States. It is a confrontation now between Spain, and we're seeing confrontations with other countries that are being resolved in US courts. And I think the question to all of us in the room is there going to be peace through these art transactions, or are we going to make it desirable for stolen items from the Ukraine to show up here and everybody pretend, oh no, we didn't know about a war in Ukraine. We didn't know about a war in Afghanistan. We didn't know about a war in Iraq. Can we just turn a blind eye and just find these things in our museums is the question. Thank you.
Good question. It's really a good question. You talk about art stolen during the conflict in violation of international law, just for profit or just for destroy the identity of a population. And now it's up to Richard
Aronowitz,
okay, from the United Kingdom. He is the global head of restoration at Christie's. And Richards is going to talk about the 1998 Washington Conference on Holocaust era assets and its 11 principles.
So I don't think I need to tell any of you in the room about the scale of the looting of art and cultural valuables under Nazism. So between 1933 and 45, it was at a scale unprecedented in human history. And when I talk about cultural valuables and personal possessions, I'm talking from Rembrandts down to teaspoons. Everything you can think of that was made by mankind before 1945 was looted by the Nazis. And already in 1943, there's evidence that the Allies were aware of this, because they drafted and published something called the London Declaration, which talked about what should be done to remedy the looting of art and cultural valuables in Nazi Europe. But even at that stage, they were aware it wasn't simply looting at the point of a gun. It was much more complex and insinuated itself into the very fabric of the Nazi regime. Often art and cultural valuables were taken from Jewish citizens of Nazi Europe as a persecutory measure. It was a tool for persecution and oppression. For instance, the Nazis invented fictitious taxes that Jews had to pay, or taxes they had to pay to get out of Nazified countries. They found every manner, every method, every tool to extract from Jewish families, either ones who stayed behind or ones who managed to get out what they owned. And it's at such a vast scale that it's impossible to put into words or really give you a clear picture, but I think you probably get a sense from the media, from Ray's talk as well. The scale was monumental. So in 1943, the Inter-Allied Declaration was drafted and published in London, which even at that stage, as the war still raged, revealed that the Allies were aware of what was going on to a certain extent. In 1945, as some of you know, the Monuments Men were founded, and by the way, it wasn't just men, there were women involved as well, whose job it was essentially to comb the fabric of what had been Nazi Europe, examining the built environment to see how castles, cathedrals, other fine monuments had fared in the 6 years of war and the 13 years of Nazism. But secondary to that, they were tasked with trying to find and recover caches of art looted under Nazism. And they took those caches to various collecting points for sorting, identification, and hopefully repatriation to the countries in which they were lost or forcibly sold in. Then it was up to the local governments generally to do the restituting to surviving family members. That effort went on really until only the early 1950s, and what strikes me as amazing from the perspective of 2023 is that the loss of cultural valuables, which of course indicated usually the loss of life, after the early 1950s was generally forgotten about. So when I began working in the international art market in the 1990s as an impressionist and modern art specialist, I used to spend my spare time, coming from a Jewish family, looking at old auction catalogues from London and New York and Paris and Zurich and wherever else. And what used to intrigue me most of all was seeing all these Jewish surnames in the ownership history, what we call provenance, of the works that were catalogued in these auction catalogues for sale. And I used to ask myself in the 1990s, what happened to these things that I'm seeing in these catalogues? And what happened to these Jewish, presumably Jewish individuals who own them? And the fact is, up until late 1990s, the international art trade could generally sell with complete impunity, and any museum worldwide could own with complete impunity anything that had been looted and not recovered. Because after the efforts of the monuments men and women fell away by the early 1950s, all that history had been largely forgotten or ignored. And it took various key events in the 1990s, particularly the sequestration here in New York by the District Attorney Morgenthau of 2 Sheila works that had been sent here on loan from the Leopold Foundation in Vienna to MoMA, to wake up the political world here in the US and museum officials and directors and the art market to what had gone on under Nazism. And the key achievement of that great shift in momentum was the 1998 Washington Conference, 1 or so hours train ride away from here. And that was the bringing together of 44 countries, from Russia to Canada to the US to wherever else, who sent diplomatic emissaries, functionaries, cultural ambassadors to Washington to discuss their country's current stance on unrecovered Nazi loot. I think there might have been an early hope that there might be some possibility of an international law being drafted to govern the restitution of unrecovered Nazi loot, but of course that wasn't possible. What was possible was the drafting of 11 non-binding moral ethical codes called the Washington Principles. And it's those 11 principles and the key phrase within them, just and fair solution, that allows people like me to work in the international art market to try and identify unrecovered Nazi loot that bubbles up in the art market. And when we discover it, we try and remedy it using the 11 Washington Principles, and particularly their language of just and fair solutions. And we broker settlements generally between the consigners who want to sell something at auction and the claimant families who lost the thing, such as Ray's clients from time to time.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. So you talk about loss of life and lost of arts, and fortunately most works of art have been rediscovered, but in other countries in the world this is not possible, and now it's up to Laura Tedesco, Bureau of South and Central Affairs of the U.S. Department of State, and Laura will be talking about cultural property, traffic in illegal antiquities, and looting of archaeological sites in Afghanistan. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. So I've shifted the topic of my talk very slightly.
Okay.
It's on Afghanistan, but when I realized I could not show visuals,
No, unfortunately.
I changed slightly, but I hope it will still be of interest, and I think it ties in nicely with a number of the other presentations. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to participate in this panel discussion on peace through art and cultural property law. I'm going to discuss a case study from a particular nation that has experienced 4 decades of war and conflict, and the role that art, cultural property, and heritage has played in the expression of violence and conflict, but also how art, the recognition of the value of cultural property, can contribute to a peaceful and prosperous society. The case study is Afghanistan. It's well reported in the news, and an area of the world where I have worked extensively for the past 13 years, having lived in Kabul and traveled Afghanistan widely. I work as an archaeologist for the U.S. Department of State. The focus of my work has been on the protection and preservation of Afghanistan's imperiled heritage and deep cultural traditions. Much of the narrative of conflict and strife of Afghanistan has been well reported in the news, and perhaps the dire accounts have become so common that it goes largely unnoticed and drowned in a field of other reports of global conflict. Similarly, the gains made towards peace and inclusive society in Afghanistan, where ethnic minorities, women, and youth were integrated as active participants in Afghan society, have been sorely underreported. The purpose of my presentation today, however, is not to recount decades of war and conflict, nor to discuss the gains in access to education or rule of law or public institutions that are more representative of society, but rather I'd like to focus on culture, heritage, and art that have served to express violence and humiliation of segments of Afghan society, but also how these same markers of a nation's heritage and artistic traditions have been utilized to contribute to a more peaceful Afghan society. Many in the room today may remember 22 years ago, in 2001, the obliteration of the justly famous Buddhas of Bamiyan, the 2 colossal Buddha statues carved from cliff faces in the Bamiyan region of Afghanistan. They each stood well over 100 feet tall and dated to the 6th century AD. These statues were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001, not simply because the Taliban regarded them as idols, according to their strict interpretation of Islam, but the destruction was a gesture of humiliation and an attempt at cultural slaughter to the minority Hazara population that inhabits the Bamiyan Valley. The Taliban were callous persecutors of the Hazara minority. Destruction of monuments embedded in Hazara cultural identity was an element for further persecution. The images of the Buddha's destruction is searing. It can be seen on YouTube for those who may not have seen these grainy, searing clips, and it forced the international community to pay attention to Afghanistan, but also to confront this video-documented modern obliteration of a nation's heritage as an act of violence to a nation's identity. We continue to witness far too many acts of political and ideological conflict expressed through the destruction of art and heritage in places like Mali, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and now Ukraine. And indeed, cultural destruction as a force of domination is nothing new to the 20th and 21st centuries. The Bamiyan Valley and the vacant niches where the Buddhas once stood was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site for Afghanistan a few years after the Buddhas were destroyed, where their universal value was only acknowledged and certified after the Buddhas no longer existed. We know who were the precise destroyers of the Buddhas of Bamiyan. Indeed, we have recorded confessions of the individual who masterminded the explosives rigged to pulverize the Buddhas. But as of today, no one has been held responsible through a judicial process. I'd like to turn for a moment to the topic of peace and what a powerful tool art and cultural heritage can be to the articulation of more peaceful societies. Again, in Afghanistan, I've worked closely on projects that for years highlighted the richness of cultural traditions of this nation and brought thousands of school children to museums and materials into classrooms, enabling children to experience and learn to embrace culture and art as a unifying expression of their national identity. The foundational concept of these programs was that by shoring up an identity that is rooted in the creative traditions of art and culture, then communities can be defined by far more than acts of violence and destruction. Also, public art is a very powerful communicator of peaceful ideas, as you were mentioning, Harald, and that can encourage social change. A program supported, also I was involved with, aimed to cover Kabul's ubiquitous blast walls that line every city street, these very tall cement walls, 14 feet tall. They're very ugly. This project aimed to cover these blast walls with simple painted murals of images, for example, of Mujahideen or Taliban fighters who, rather than carry machine guns on their backs, were depicted with pencils or flowers slung on their backs. Or simple images of camels carrying cargo rather than bales of wheat, but red hearts as expressions of love. These murals were painted in public, and any of the public walking past could participate in the paint by numbers process. It's a beautiful example of how public art can communicate and encourage social change. Art, I'm concluding now, art and culture and heritage are all fundamental aspects of society's spiritual infrastructure. By invoking the word spiritual, I'm not referring to religion, but rather the invisible web of culture, traditions, visual and tangible arts that unify and give meaning to life and our place in a community, whether community is defined as a family, a village, a province, a nation, and the world. When arts and culture are destroyed, the harm goes far beyond simple material destruction. It's a societal injury. While the past events of cultural destruction in Afghanistan may be uncorrectable in our contemporary context, in the context of this gathering here, and you who I regard as auspicious rule of law practitioners, culture specialists, I would urge that it's critical for the international justice system and the practitioners working within this system strive to tackle the international destruction of cultural property. The harm goes far beyond the arts and culture. By tackling the destruction of art and culture through the judicial systems of the world, this contributes to peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So I just bring some notes. So you just thank you for remembering us about the Buddha of Bamiyan. Okay, I always
It's okay.
invert the letter. And so cultural property and tradition, it's a value, and this destruction of them means humiliation for the people. So fundamental aspect of a society, if you lose them, you lose your past, you lose your identity, and so this is the reason why now I'm going to give the word to Fabrizio Parrulli. Fabrizio is how do you pronounce it? General, Major General,
yes, Major General.
Military and Police Advisor, Permanent Mission of Italy to the United Nations. And Fabrizio Parrulli is going to talk about the protection of cultural heritage, as well as the prevention and countering of illicit trade of cultural property have been and will continue to be a top priority for Italy. So thank you, Fabrizio. It's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Giulia, for inviting me. And I will give my perspective that is more law enforcement perspective, also some insight about what is going on within the United Nations when we speak about culture. And as you say, the protection of cultural heritage, as well as the prevention and countering of the illicit trade of cultural property, have been and will continue to be a top priority for Italy. In 1969, Italy became the first country in the world to create a specialized unit in the protection of cultural heritage in the fight against illicit trafficking of cultural property within the Carabinieri Corps, the Carabinieri Command for the Protection of Cultural Heritage. From this moment, to be short, I will say TPC, it's not Tutela Patrimonio Culturale. Well, since its foundation, it has been on the front lines in this battle, and to date, our investigations have led to the recovery of almost 2.1 million of works of art and the seizure of more than 1 million of archaeological artifacts. We have investigated approximately 28,000 people and detained more than 1,400. Those figures demonstrate the Carabinieri Corps' steadfast commitment to defending the world's collective tradition and history. Our most powerful tool, the database of stolen cultural artifacts that we call Leonardo, stores more than 1.2 million images and files on stolen artifacts, as well as the more than 6.9 million pictures and description of artworks covered by our investigation. Originally, the world's largest archive of stolen artifacts is now a powerful data analysis tool for processing data entries and aiding our investigations. The growing use of telematics channels instead of the traditional ones for illicit trade or the export of cultural heritage require continuous updating of information technology systems. The SWOTS, the Stolen Work of Art Detection System project that is currently being finalized, allowed for the automatic collection of data from the web, deep web, social media, and the information entered by the operational components, the result of our control activities, and to compare all with the textual and photographic contents of the work of art registered in the Leonardo database. More often than not, trafficking in cultural property is a transactional crime, which requires a transactional investigative approach. Objects are stolen from one country, smuggled across the border or the borders of another, and then sold illegally in another country, perhaps ultimately finding a home in yet another country. The looting and smuggling of cultural property is a complex crime that requires a specific focus and unique expertise that goes beyond the usual toolkit of police personnel. The only way to successfully protect cultural heritage is through close interagency work across borders. In that context, the Carabinieri TPC serves as model for other countries when it comes to engaging international cooperation at the judicial, law enforcement, and specialist level. The Carabinieri TPC has also been providing specialized support in preserving cultural heritage in the context of peacekeeping operation, as well as training on the investigation of the illicit trade to police officers and customs officials around the world. With them, we share information, best practice, and lessons learned. Building on this experience, in 2016, Italy, together with UNESCO, launched the Blue Helmets for Culture initiative, as we spoke before, creating a national task force working within the framework of UNESCO Unite for Heritage campaign. The task force, first of its kind, brings together officers from the Carabinieri TPC and experts from Italy Ministry of Culture to support requesting member states facing a crisis or natural disaster in their efforts to preserve and assess damage to cultural heritage and prevent looting and trafficking, including by terrorist groups. Italy's commitment to the protection of cultural heritage and the fight against the traffic and illicit trade of cultural artifacts extend beyond its national borders. These efforts were crystallized in Resolution 2347 of 2017, promoted by Italy and France, which was the first ever resolution adopted by the United Nations Security Council, dedicated exclusively to the destruction and trafficking of cultural heritage in situations of armed conflict, and notably by terrorist groups. In Resolution 2347, the Security Council recognized the indispensable role of international cooperation in preventing and countering the illicit trade and trafficking in cultural property in situations of armed conflict, and at the hands of terrorists or terrorist groups. As part of its international counter-terrorism effort, Italy, together with the US and Saudi Arabia, also co-chaired the Counter-ISIS Finance Working Group of the Global Coalition Against Daesh, and leads its sub-working groups which specifically addresses the illicit traffic of cultural property. More recently, in 2018, Italy co-founded, together with Cyprus, the Group of Friends for the Protection of Cultural Heritage within the UN. Stemming from the impetus of Resolution 2347, the Group of Friends aims to promote the ratification and implementation of relevant international instruments and strengthen international cooperation to prevent and to fight the destruction of cultural heritage and the illicit trade of cultural property, including when linked to the terrorist objectives. These are just some examples of Italy's, mostly the Carabinieri, engagement on the topic. We intend to continue to drive these efforts forward and to support member states in making the protection of cultural heritage an imperative for long-lasting peace and security. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Fabrizio. So the investigation made by Carabinieri TPC give us a hope. Let me say that in this contest. But now we have time, 15 minutes for question and answer. So if you have some question, actually I have one to Fabrizio. I want to ask you if there is, in your investigation, I mean, in the time that you are inside the TPC group, you are the general, major general TPC group, which is the best investigation that ended well?
Always the last one probably is the future one, the best, because you are very happy when you look forward to the future. You have the possibility to bring back to your culture, to your country, something more. This is quite sure. But there are a lot of them. I don't remember very well because I was involved in a lot of them. But one of the last that in which I was involved in recovering was a beautiful piece of art that was produced by Luca Andrea della Robbia, was a beautiful
Ceramic.
Yes, perfect. That was stolen at the end of 1970 in Italy, in Scansano, that is a very nice place in Tuscany. It's a very nice little village in Grosseto provinces in Tuscany. And this beautiful piece of art was stolen, and was we followed the path in the later was through an auction house. Unfortunately, you arrive in Switzerland, then from Switzerland to US, from US to Canada, and then finally approached to a family in Canada. And when we discovered that this beautiful bassorilievo was in Canada, I decided to go to Canada because I was invited, thanks to the invitation that I received from the director of the Institute of Culture in Ottawa to make a presentation. I decided to go to the owner of this bassorilievo to make what we spoke before. I mean, to make consciousness about what that this piece of art was coming from a theft. And so I succeed, and I also I asked to these people, to this family, to give back to Italy, and I promised to them to make a very great ceremony of restitution in Scansano, and also to promise to them, to the family, to show this beautiful work of art at the Quirinale Palace, because it was in 2019, and so we celebrated the 50 year of the activity of the Carabinieri for the protection of cultural heritage, and during the exhibit, the beautiful piece of art by Luca Andrea della Robbia was displayed as one of the most important piece of art that was recovered by Carabinieri. So this was one of my probably most, I would say, also emotional, success during my period.
Thank you. Thank you. So, any other questions, curiosity that you want to? Yes.
It's a very soft line. It's not something I would normally ask a typically jurisprudential. I'm reading Daniel Silva's latest, and Daniel Silva writes these very popular novels published in many, many languages. And there is a general in the Carabinieri, in the art world, who I believe was once denying fingers to the mafia. Are you model for that gentleman?
The Nativity, I think, I suppose,
Yeah.
by Caravaggio,
Yes.
that was stolen in 1969.
Yes.
Yes.
So you're going to confess to being a model for this?
In the hands of the mafia, we don't know. We are not sure, but the direction goes almost there. So, but okay, just tell
Well,
me
I
something.
don't know if I can answer until. I mean, no. Anyway, unfortunately, what was sure that at the time who make this theft, they didn't realize what they were, what they did. They didn't realize. They didn't know what they were doing, what they are taking away from this beautiful place, this San Lorenzo.
Yes, inside the
The
what do you call the
San
church?
Lorenzo Church, and probably what happened later was something that could be probably linked also to organized crime, because when you have a piece of art like this one, probably you have to be very careful if you want to put on the market, and so you have to use the right also organization to do this, and then it's possible that probably some organization were involved in this process. Yes.
Come si dice il primo ricercato? Is the first.
The first wanted in the list.
The first
yeah,
wanted. Yes, the first wanted.
is in the red list of the first work of art that we are still looking for. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No one? So I try to synthesize a little bit what we just discussed today. Just bring my notes and the words that frequently came out from your speech. Let me say, so fashion is a sort of keys to enter inside the differences, appreciate differences and learn to respect each other. So this is the meaning of the cultural diplomacy. Mm-hmm. And then we have heritage touchable or untouchable, and this is also the meaning of this heritage is also collegated to the traditions. We talk about performing arts, street arts, concert, exhibition that create messages, but also allow us to receive messages, so the messages can be transferred, and art is a way to express but also to control, I mean, the message that you told us. So the express, I mean, it's an opinion, and art actually is a way to communicate. Then we talk about peace and war that are the same, on the same coin, two faces of the same coin, and artists use art for communicate, but also patrons use art to communicate. And so you talk about the two examples that came from ancient Roman time, I mean Arapacis, and then from almost contemporary art, let me say that, by the Guernica by Picasso. So art stolen during the conflict in violation of international law, and we talk about that this art usually are stolen for profit, but sometimes is destroy the identity of a population. And so these works of art, sometimes this work of art are the possibility to be rediscovered, but in other countries this one is not possible, and we talk about the Afghanistan that was happened in the southeast world. Then we just talk about that the investigation by the Carabinieri TPC give us literally a hope, and in this direction with an invitation to hope that everybody are involved in this cultural way to conserve and protect, but also to give a future to our past. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for your speeches, and see you in a couple of years, right? In the next World Jurist Association Congress. Thank you to everybody.